Today, we hear one of the best-known parables of Jesus, the parable of the wayward or prodigal son. It's a parable that can speak to us in so many different ways, one used by preachers to tell so many different truths about temptation, irresponsibility, relationship, faithfulness. As I read through the commentaries, getting ready for our lectionary study group that we have, I was reminded of some exegetical nuances that have been used in many of the sermons I have heard, even some that I have given. Our study group unpacked them a little bit to better understand what Jesus was saying. But as this parable speaks to us so differently, depending on where we are at along our journeys of faith, to preach on one truth over another, or to say that one truth is more relevant than another, would to be speaking to one part of the congregation and not the rest. Conversely, to preach on the whole thing would take a lot longer than a typical Sunday sermon would allow. I think some of you would get up and walk out the door. We could, in fact, I think, spend an entire Lent program looking at this parable, and there would still be more for us to glean from the message Jesus is sharing with such a diverse audience. Faced with such a dilemma, it was tempting to turn away from the gospel and focus instead on Paul's reminder that we are ambassadors of Christ, sharing the good news that in and through Jesus Christ we have been reconciled with God and one another. Or maybe to use the reading from Joshua today on how the people of Israel give thanks for their freedom by celebrating the Passover and sharing the news of the restoration of their relationship with God to their children. Or maybe the psalmist's witness that being in relationship with God is where all can know true and lasting peace. But just as the complexity of this parable gives us cause to bypass it, its multiplicity screams out at us to dive deeper into it. But where does one start? When faced with such an insurmountable task, starting is often the toughest thing we ever do. How many here have ever tried to start a diet? A few hands. How about those who have tried quitting smoking? Or decided they wanted to run a marathon? That one's not so. How about the goal to read the Bible from cover to cover? There. Starting where we encounter obstacles we don't think we can overcome results in what? Failure. For me, when it came to reading the Bible cover to cover, it was the book of Numbers. I can't tell you how many times I get about halfway through the book of Numbers, throw up my arms and say, enough's enough. I don't need this. It doesn't make any sense. But Thomas Edison once said about the frustration we feel when we encounter failure, helped me get through it. When he was asked, does he ever get frustrated by the failures in his life? He said, no, because I have never failed. I've just found 10,000 ways it did not work. What an optimist. For him, failing was giving up and not trying again or even again. I believe he knew, and you've heard me use this imagery before, that the only way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. In other words, we have to keep at it if we are going to succeed. And if we run into one area in life that's a little bit tough, we start in another direction, from another spot, and work towards that tough spot from another angle. So before figuring out what am I really going to preach at today, I went back and I looked at my other sermons to see where I have gone before on this reading, which, by the way, only comes up in its entirety during Lent and in year C, which means we only hear it about every 3 years. Since being here at Holy Spirit, one year I approached it from the viewpoint, the vantage point of the wayward son, talking about our sense of unworthiness to receive the love God so freely offers. Another year I looked at it from the Father's point of view, and how his willingness to give that son a second chance gives us hope when it comes to answering for our own inequities. This year, I thought I'd look at it from the viewpoint of relationships, their sense of community, and see where that ended up. The first thing we notice about them is they are family. And in many ways, that says it all, doesn't it? Families don't always see eye to eye with one another about things. There's petty squabbles about things like power or money or possessions. Families get mad at each other. They cry with each other. They even laugh with each other. But despite this, even if every family doesn't want to admit it, every family out there has some degree of dysfunctionality. What keeps them together is the fact that they're family. Granted, like the family in today's gospel reading, they're not always cohesive. They don't always look like family. But as the Father reminds us, or reminds the unhappy son, and as Sister Sledge's 1979 hit says, we are family. Because there's this unbreakable bond. While we may not like what someone in our family has done or said, we are still called to love them anyway. Love. As Jesus and some semi-modern day philosophers, Captain Tennille, once said, love keeps us together. You guys aren't near as good as the 8 o'clock, I'll tell you. Love will keep us together when nothing else will. Love, like Gorilla Glue, can do more than we can imagine when it comes to keeping that relationship together. Without love, there is no way that the wayward son could ever ask the Father for forgiveness. Without love, there is no way the Father would ever give it. And without love, there is no way the unhappy son will ever walk into a celebration his Father is giving for someone he doesn't believe deserves it. And I think we can all relate to the unhappy son and how he feels. We, like him, have trouble holding on to relationships after trust has been broken, after we have been hurt in some way, or betrayed by another's words or actions. The natural tendency is just what we see in that son's behavior, in his anger. We stand still in our place. We cross our arms and we say, it's not fair. He's right. It's not. But relationships aren't always about fairness. They are about our connectedness. Maybe some of you remember last year, one of our Facebook cover photos was this image of people standing on a grid. And that grid connected everyone in the picture. And not just those closest to the one person, but to everybody, even those on the fringe of the community that is portrayed. And if anyone here has ever researched their family tree, one thing that picture tells us is we can be surprised how many people we are connected to, directly, indirectly. We also would be surprised by some of those who we are connected to, but we won't go there. Years ago, I began my own family tree research. I began with 4 names. I've identified and confirmed over 400. One distant relative of mine was a former president of the United States. Some were pastors, Some were warriors. A few of them I've learned were even scoundrels. And there is a good chance that I am a distant relative of a member of this parish named Howard Tarleton. The point is, we are connected to one another, and we are in relationship with another, not by chance, but like the DNA that runs through a family tree, we are connected in and through God's love. God's love, like the love of the Father in today's parable, invites us to celebrate that relationship, to look past one another's failings and see that the same Spirit that is in us is in the other too. It also means recognizing and looking beyond our own failings. Those things we do that inhibit us from knowing the fullness of our relationship with God and with one another. We can stand our ground with our arms crossed, saying it's not fair. Or we can accept God's invitation to enjoy the many blessings our relationships can offer. The choice is ours. And it's not a choice between isolation or community. It's not a choice between living in darkness or living in the light. It's a choice about knowing and sharing in the love of God or not. God will not force us to accept this invitation. Because to do so would make us more like little puppets than children loved by God. But God does make it clear that when we ask, it will be given. When we seek, we will find. When we knock, that door will be open. In other words, God's faithfulness to our relationships is so much a part of what makes God God that when we one day enter into that celebration, we will know that it is ours to enjoy forever. Amen.